folks. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am said Forest of the East. Welcome to this little edition. I'm really excited to be sharing a conversation with Bayo Akomolafe. This is one of my most favorite conversations I've had. And I love all the conversations I have. They're all like little spore children that I get to be a part of birthing, and they're all wonderful and for different reasons. And this was one that, I don't know, it sparked something in me that felt really special. And sometimes we get into an energy of conversation that I really enjoy, and this is one of those. And Bayo was coming to us all the way from India, and we recorded this. This is my obligatory time where I tell you the date of the recording, the time period. This was in COVIDian times, but before the accentuation of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that will give you a little background on why perhaps that was not spoken to. But the kind of themes that Bayo gets into, and one of the reasons I think I resonate with it so much, is that it is from this larger sort of meta perspective via poetry and art and metaphor. And he's touching on the deeper levels and themes of the things that we are yearning for. He's an author and a lecturer, and he's got some organizations he's founded, including the Emergence Network. He has a book that I recently picked up that I wanted to check out of his that is called These Wilds Beyond Our Fences: Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home. It's a great title. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. I know you will. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Just so you know, the retreat in Utah in October 1st through 4th, 2020. It is still currently scheduled. We're going to decide in July whether to move forward with it, and one option is to shift it to April. So just know that if you do sign up, you can shift your deposit to whatever future date if you want to do that, or we will give you a refund if we need to cancel it, of course, or change the date. So in that sense, it is refundable for those reasons. If you want to reserve that space for you, that would be the way to do it. That's all at eastforest.org. I also released the Vigil for Black Lives Lost track last week, and I realized that track is heavy. It's hard to listen to in a sense. I think the music is engaging and interesting. I really actually like the end of it, musically, but I recognize that it's probably hard to get through, and in some ways that's the point, perhaps, that it's hard to hear all those names of Black lives killed in police violence. But it is out if you want to listen to it and share it. And I think it's a worthy experiment to sit with it and see what emotions and the emotional quality that does come up. I do think there's value in that. So that is on all streaming services, and all proceeds of that streaming and downloads and purchases go to Inclusive Idaho and Campaign Zero. Thank you for giving this podcast a review. Just give it 5 stars. Give it a written review. Share it with your friends on social media. Send me a note telling me what you think. And even better, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Let's see, we got 2 new reviews here on Apple Podcasts. You can do this while I'm talking. You just go back to the main screen, scroll down to the bottom. Marsig Music gives us 5 stars and says, great insight and depth into the spiritual realm. You like the high vibration beings who support love and compassion. Their goals and desires are for the greater good of mankind. We truly are what our thoughts consume. So if you want to grow more love, more peace, more compassion, give this podcast some of your attention. Well, that's kind of you. Thank you. Thanks for the support. Ayurvedic Auto Harp, you've given reviews before. Thank you so much for doing another one, which you can do. Tears came to my eyes, too, with the repetition of George Floyd's name in Vigil for Black Lives Lost. This is intensely moving and beautiful. Bless you. Well, I had the same experience. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but while I was mixing that song, every time at the end where they say George Floyd's name 3 times with the music, I cried. And I'll be honest with you, before I created the music, I didn't. meaning like I was angry, I was upset, I was disturbed, I was shocked, but I didn't have that body gut response, hadn't found a pathway out yet. And somehow, in something with the music, when they say those names, man, it just like, whew, I feel it now. Like it's emotional. It's really emotional, and it brings tears up in my eyes. With that, it's something about hearing 5,000 people say that back and say it again and say it again. So in that way, I hope you can get to the end, because there's a gift there of humanity, of our humanity, and an emotional process. So on that note, I'm back in Boise, Idaho, and I'm working on music and projects and staying nice and busy and surfing these times, as I'm sure you are too. And it's the craziest thing on earth, and it's the greatest show on earth. And I hope you guys keep doing what you do with grace, okay? Just keep cutting yourself some slack and doing your best, as I hope you are. So let's get into this conversation with my friend Bayo Akomolafe. I was looking through your work, and I felt like a deep resonance with a lot of what you're saying, and a lot of interesting questions come up for me, but I kind of feel like they're not going to have answers, but the answers comes through the conversation, which is
Right.
perfect in a way. It's sort of like I kept coming back to the idea of a Buddhist koan when I
Uh-huh.
was reading your work. And so it's
Uh-huh.
like there's something interesting about like the two of us talking, because the answer, in a sense, is the conversation, in that there is no
Mm-hmm.
answer,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And
Nice.
so there's sort
Nice.
of an absurdity to me asking you questions at all, but I want to actually just like give you catalyst to speak and let it go where it goes, as any
Right.
good conversation is. So,
I,
um,
I, I mean, I think we belittle questions by expecting them to always reproduce or produce answers for us. I think questions can produce questions, and they can produce silence. I don't think they necessarily have to be put in the family way, you know, give birth
yeah.
to answers, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a perfect point, and that's something I've been thinking a lot about and speaking to since these COVIDian times have started. Is how it's bringing forth pause. Like
Yeah.
the role of pause in a time when our bodies and the limbic part of our minds are screaming for action.
Hmm.
And I heard you speak about that here and there. How do you feel that the role of pause comes into play in these times we're in?
I think pause is a gift. Uh, I was thinking through the literal cinematic dynamics of pause, um, through a cartoon that I used to watch when I was littler. Uh, what's that called? Is it Roadrunner and the Coyote or something?
Oh, a classic, yeah.
It's a cla-
Yeah. The Roadrunner always gets. Wait, which one gets smashed up all the time or dies? It's the
It's
Coyote.
Coyote. It's Coyote.
Coyote gets
It's
played by the
Coyote.
Roadrunner. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
always Coyote. The Roadrunner never bruises, never is disturbed. Is always a Coyote. I was just imagining those scenes, in which his plans are foiled again. His attempts to capture the Roadrunner are foiled again, and he probably dashes off a cliff and realizes that it's downhill. It's down
Right, right.
into the valley from here, and he looks at the audience as if to gain our sympathy. Like, guys, why me? And then he plummets to whatever. And I was thinking about how stopping is almost different from pausing. Like um, one could stop. The dynamics of a stoppage are um, are inherent to that temporality. Like he stops, it's in that world. But pausing is a different kind of relationality altogether. It's
Mm,
me literally picking the remote control. Maybe my mother calls or someone calls and I pause it. He doesn't need to be on a cliff. Just pausing the video is an interruption from outside the framework. So pausing is a different kind of transversal relationship. It's not inside the situation, it's outside. Systems stop all the time, but I don't think they pause all the time. Um, and in that sense, I feel pausing is like a cosmic happening. It's an event. It's to say cosmic. I don't mean to say that things that are disruptive, like this COVIDian phenomenon, are not in some senses cosmic. Something totally outside of our economy of intelligibility, our ecology of making sense of things, disrupts the assemblage of our bodies, and then we don't know what to do. But the gift of that is that we find each other for the first time. We notice the contours of our bodies, the contours of our sense making, skills or capacities. We kind of notice each other for the first time. There's this joke we tell in Nigeria of how we only recognize ourselves as black when white people came. Like it's, oh, okay, yeah, we're black. Or the things with fish, in the water, two fish meeting each other and, hey, how's the water?
Right.
And one is like,
Right.
what's
What?
water? It's
Yeah.
only when you take the fish out of water that it recognizes water for the first time and its own situation or its own relationality with water. So I would say that pause is this interactive relationship between assemblages. By assemblage, I mean a network of relationships. Of this COVIDian phenomenon came with a body of relationships, its own world, and crash landed into our own world like a meteorite. And suddenly we see ourselves. We're asking questions about what touch implies, what it means to have economies framed so readily around death and despair and capitalism. We're asking Andrew Yang, the erstwhile presidential candidate, no longer sound far out. So that people
Yeah.
are asking questions about UBI. He's no longer strange, like something from the Twilight Zone. So a pause makes or attempt. No, I don't want to say attempt, as if there's some intentionality there, but it tends to make things that are strange familiar, and familiar things strange. That's how I see it.
It's a lot to chew on. I want to read something that when you and I were communicating, I doubt you heard this, but I've actually read this on the podcast before because it struck me so much. When we were scheduling, you wrote me back.
Uh-huh.
And this paragraph you wrote, this was a scheduling email. And this is what I was trying to, I read this to a few of my friends. It's like, why is this hitting me so hard? But I just want to read what you said. You said, I find I need more time to be grounded before coming up to talk with you. These COVID days, I'm not as lucid or as clear minded as I would like to be. Suddenly sweeping, washing dishes, changing diapers, bathing the kids, cooking meals, cleaning the floor. These are my theory making work. It is as if I fell down to earth, away from the headlines of the clouds, of the airports and audiences, and into the serenading sleep of the ordinary. My body wants to go along with this, to be home for a while, to learn how to play with my children, to realign my neurons away from the stability of being away all the time.
Come on, I didn't write all that. I'm reading it
That's
and I'm like, no way I wrote that.
that was like right when COVID hit, like maybe a week
Right,
or two. Like
right.
we were both. So just to give context, but
Yeah.
I found a beauty in that I find echoing in myself, and I've heard in some other people about not wanting to be moving forward in some strange fear of like parroting ourselves or parroting the past in a way that there's this newness emerging, but it's so unknown.
Mhm.
We don't even know how to step into it other than to step into it by some kind of not continuing all of the habits that, what can we control that maybe I can stop? Like you and I saying, let's just jump into talking about what this is. Where are you now? It's been probably 2 months or so since you had those feelings.
Well, it's interesting that note that I shared with you because, yeah, it was, and it's true. And it came from a deeply honest place. Um,
And thank you for that. I really felt that sort of genuineness for two people who didn't really know each other. I
yeah.
appreciated that, just sort of offering that slice into your psyche and your heart.
Thank you. Thank you. And I thank you for making space for us to have this conversation in spite of those moments. Well, I found that um, for many years I've been traveling. I've been in airports, out of airports. When I'm home, I'm planning to be in an airport again. I lost my ability to be with my children, to be at home, in the effort to take care of my family, to take care of my gifts, or to do what I sense my gifts are inviting me to do. I lost my sense of bearing, my grounding. Um, so much so that my wife had to remind me once that on your deathbed, you would want to remember us. You would want to remember me, not a talk you gave.
Yeah.
Um,
I resonate so deeply with this because I was the same way just with music and
yeah,
always traveling.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just on the road. The dust hasn't been cleaned off my the surfaces of my skin before I'm already being booked on another flight. I literally went transatlantic once in 3 days. I mean, from United States to India, and then the next day jumping on a maybe to Brazil or something. I can't even remember. So much so
That's
that
rough.
some flight attendants would recognize me, like, you're back, on literally, and I would literally go back to the place, the point, the seat that I'd left behind, in another, just to register the absurdity of what was happening. Um, and so this felt like a pause, like that coyote roadrunner pause. It was like, I can't do this anymore. And the COVID-19 phenomenon is uh, registered in terms of, yes, a loss of lucidity. I kind of got loose lipped. Like, I didn't know what to say any longer. I
Yes.
was deeply confused. Things weren't gelling that I thought they were. My worldview, or my implicit ideologies or ways of thinking and navigating stuff today. And I'm grateful for that, because where I'm at now is, that loosening, that breaking down, that composting agency allowed me to become soupy, you know, and open for a different kind of configuration. Like the imaginal cells will reconfigure the soupy configurations of cells to make up a butterfly from a caterpillar dissolving. It felt really, it is feeling like that way. It, I no longer have a relationship with work that is tyrannical. Um, I'm learning to say to people, no, I cannot do this, or I'm really sorry, I cannot have space for this conversation because my daughter says no on this day.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it feels grounding, it feels alive. And ironically, I feel fresher or refreshed, to have conversations like this, because I know how to wash dishes well, um,
Yes. Some
and
Karate Kid
change
stuff.
diapers
Yeah.
with, yeah,
It's
it's
the
wax on,
basics. It's
wax
been
off.
taught. Yeah. Yeah. Though I want to connect the dots here. So I'm hearing you say that you were in a kind of dream that was awakened by this inflection point of COVID-19, as it is for many of us. And
Yeah,
for a lot, it's been forced
yeah,
upon us, really. It's just how much are we going to accept that happening? And I was reading in your own bio that you had another moment like this early in life in Lagos when it just says you had an encounter with traditional healers. And when I
yeah,
see that and I hear about Lagos, I think Iboga. But I'm curious if you could. I have no idea what it was, but you were saying that you had a way of seeing the world before, and you had a
yeah.
way of seeing the world after whatever you went through. And I was hoping you could speak to that so we can kind of see how whatever happened brought us to where you are now.
Right. Well, Iboga is Gabon, is most um, flourishes in Gabon, more than in Nigeria. I don't know that those psychedelic um,
Okay.
substances are found in Lagos or in Nigeria. Um, but yeah, and this is why I usually say that beliefs are strategies. They're not just representational, you know, uh, cognitive ideational things stuck in our heads that are supposedly reflective of a truth that is objectively verifiable or not objectively verifiable. The way we treat beliefs. and ideas. I think beliefs are material ways we navigate the world, difference making um, maneuvers that are world making processes as well. And they're tied with experience, they're tied with things that are surprisingly trivial, without rendering what I'm saying to be some kind of biological determinism. I think even the ways we show up, the kind of things we eat, and the kinds of situations we find ourselves, like the furniture you're sitting on right now, could surprisingly shape the ways we believe, and we show up in the world. Um, and having said that, I grew up in a context that was deeply fundamentalist, and to be specific, Christian. I grew up in a deeply Christian world, but there was no big deal probably for me with that understanding. It was when my father passed away that I found that I needed a sense of, and this is probably another conversation on masculinity, but he was my
Mhm.
prime model of masculinity, of the male figure, something I never really um, lived up to. He was the man of the house. I don't know how to be the man of the house, even till today. My wife was just telling me, sorry for moving here and there, branching here and
No,
there,
it's all
uh,
great.
taking quantum leaps. But my wife told me a while ago that um, y- um, you get triggered easily when, and it's probably because you had childhood experiences of people telling you you should stand up to your sisters. I had no brothers. I only had sisters, three sisters, powerful women. Um, and I tended to do things like them. And people, other men in their own houses would remind me that's not how a man should behave. You should tell your
Mm.
sister, you should do this or do that. You shouldn't like these kinds of things. You should like these kinds of things. Um, and so I definitely grew up with some trauma around that. Um, and so when my father passed on, I had no other masculine figure. I only had Jesus. I had the absolute. I had the transcendent. And so my way of seeing the world was based on truth. That it was a strictly linear Newtonian Cartesian system where the more lucid you are, the more reflective of reality as it is, that you can hold. But that fell apart, to cut the long story short, in small ways, in small doses. But I think the real punch was meeting these men, these healers, who said to me things that are wild, terrifying, um, haunting, and liberatory all at once. They introduced me to a world that it wasn't a totally unfamiliar world. I'd known of this world. This is my culture, but I'd only known about it through the prism of cinematic moments. I didn't really, I hadn't really experienced a healer at work. But when
Mm.
I sat before them in the context of researching clinical psychological dimensions through cultural lenses, they taught me different things, and they helped me break apart from the notion that truth is singular or that truth is even plural. Um, they slowly ushered me into a world where I can play with indeterminacy, a playful world that makes possible the kind of things that you love to explore.
Sounds like they were Zen monks, or or
I wouldn't call them Zen monks. Zen monks would be outraged if they saw this. They are not holy in the least. They are very perverse.
tricksters.
They're trickster figures,
Uh-huh.
threatening at some point to
Coyotes.
turn me coyotes. Yeah, coyotes. Threatening at some point, at least one of them did so, to turn me into uh, a tuba of yam, I think, a piece of yam or a goat or something like that,
It's quite a threat. Yeah.
for asking too many questions. And me, in my educated Westernness, I laughed it off. But the person who sat next to me, who brought me to this healer, wasn't laughing at all. He didn't
It's
find it
now a
funny.
goat. Yeah.
No, he's not a goat, and I'm not a. At least I think I'm not a goat. But he didn't find it funny, and his reaction made me stiffen my back and say, maybe you shouldn't laugh here. Maybe the
Yeah.
things you don't understand. Yeah.
So do you see parallels from that experience with those healers? If how is COVID the
Yeah.
healer now? How is it the trickster?
In just the same way that tricksters operate by mocking your sense of fundamentalism, by mocking your ground, your claims to groundedness, your claims to coherence, your claims to integrity. That's what a good trickster does. It's in the rule book of tricksters. Haven't you read it? It's basically
I
it's
saw the cartoon, but yeah.
it it's basically, hey, you say you love this lady, and you would cross the seven mountains and seven oceans or to be with her. And let's test that. Let's test that. And that's why tricksters make the world, to quote Lewis Hyde. It's because it's their testing, it's their experimentation, their perverse experimentation with being that makes becoming possible. They're the ones that put the in becoming. They put the gerund in things that makes things move, that makes things emergent and continuous. I resist the archetypizing. I'm just creating a word here that I resist the attempt to make them archetypes. Let me put it that way. Um, I think they resist categorization. The trickster mythopoetic resists that kind of boxing in. So the COVID-19 phenomenon feels a lot like that to me. It feels like um, you guys claim to care for each other and that you're creating a system that is wholesome, that is human, that is benevolent. Now see yourselves at this point in time. And I think for me personally, the idea that nation states are rushing to return people to their places of work at a time when the reproduction value of the virus doesn't seem like it's reducing. Um, that tells me that we don't live in a system that works for any of us. That the plantation is not designed to support life. That it's exhausted and it's far beyond its composting point.
Hmm. So for yourself, what elements do you find that are emerging in this soup, in this compost, that COVID or no COVID, you know, you're speaking, I'm hearing too, in this pause is a kind of pleasure. There's a
Yeah.
kind of less is more, or kind of awakening from a days of thinking that. I feel that in the past, where I thought that, as you spoke to, you're given a certain gifts and you want
Mm-hmm.
to serve them, but there is that element, the fire that fuels that engine is your ego,
Mm-hmm.
which plays a role to say like, yes, I feel fired up by feeling purposeful, by
Mm-hmm.
being the warrior of the traveler, being out like,
Mm-hmm.
how far can I take this? How fast can I push this engine? How
Mm-hmm.
big can the blast be? And I still feel that fire, but I also have this simultaneous fire of sort of not knowing and appreciating and enjoying not doing all of that. But I'm not also ready to just say, well, that's just turn that off. That feels like that's being dishonest to my incarnation in a way. And I'm in this middle place of
Mm-hmm.
of truly not knowing how I will continue to navigate, but I'm just trying to bring patience to it and
Right.
listening. I don't know
Right.
what else to do.
Right.
And talking about it like we're talking about it, is kind of speak to saying, well, I don't really know, but I feel something. And it's like a garden I want to tend, but I don't know.
Mm. Um, Let me put it this way: that where do our desires come from? Where do our motivations, our hopes, our imaginations? One story about them is they come from human beings. Desires are human, imaginations are definitely human. They proceed from an unspoken part of ourselves, which in some religious spaces might be called a soul or something like that, um, or which psychologists might try to reduce to some biochemical signals or something, but they're mysterious desires and stuff. I tend to see these all too human properties, the things that we rudely, in my opinion, call human properties, as ecological things, as ecological processes, um, that desires, imaginations, and this is borne out, in research that demonstrates, for instance, that we share something the psychologists call the social unconscious, which is we share images of things, and we don't know how those images and imaginations come to us, but we're kind of like part of this network, this hidden, invisible network of images, of ideas, which could be helpful sometimes, but also um, limiting and um, deadening some other times. Um, but to push the point home, I feel that in times of crisis such as this one, um, some desires that were probably dormant might find the light of day. I mean it in this sense that I think the world works brother, I just want you to know by speaking, I'm speaking with an acknowledgement that to speak itself is a form of violence. So when I say the world, I'm already thinking, not that I believe or think that there is such a coherent structure called the world or a category called nature. But for the sake of conversation, I would just call it so. I feel that in times of crisis like this, desires, imaginations, the world works by exclusion. It works by, uh, in what Niels Bohr, the quantum physicist, the father of quantum dynamics, called complementarity. And that is, if you create an assemblage or an apparatus that measures a particle, you've excluded the possibility of measuring a wave. If you measure a wave, you've excluded the possibility of measuring a particle. There's some kind of complementarity there. Our modern system, we don't just inhabit modern arrangements, we are products of modern arrangements. We don't just live in containers, in bubbles. We're literally being worked on. Our bodies, the ways we think, the ways we hope, even the ways we conduct justice, our activisms are products, ironically, of the system that we're trying to escape. And so we are gestating, constantly gestating in the city, being produced by the city, in as much as we produce the city. There's an interactivity going on there. And it's not just our bodies, it's what for common parlance we'll call the mind, our desires and stuff. So when that apparatus, when the furniture in the room, when a ghost appears and rearranges stuff and throws around dishes and makes noises, disturbing sounds, then other kinds of desires might take root and might perchance become resilient. I sense that the desire to travel, to go out there and stuff like that, it's not your stuff or my stuff. It's an ecological thing that we're caught up in. We're enlisted to be part of this movement of desires, of emotions. I've been sensing different kinds of desires to speak to your question. I've been desiring this groundedness even more. Like I'm really enjoying, I understand the tragedy of this time, but I also, like you said, I'm deepening myself in the pleasure of being at home. Like I told my wife recently, if planes are completely wiped out, I would not regret it one bit. I would not sorrow. I would not, probably I would grieve a while for the speed of it, but I would not feel a deepening or a deep sense of loss. Like I feel really, and I don't know how to speak to it. Maybe my children, maybe it's an intergenerational thing. Maybe our children yet to come will find words for this moment. But at this point in time, I feel delighted to to sit with a dish, to have the sink pile up with dishes, and then to attempt to bring it down and to wipe my hands and then to go to bed. It feels, and maybe that's only for a while. Maybe boredom will set in subsequently. But but at this moment in time, I feel maybe this is something, this is something that might take root. And if it takes root, if the ecology or the politics of the moment changes, if oil is no longer possible, if planes are no longer possible and quick travel no longer possible, then maybe a new kind of us might emerge.
Yes, it seems like COVID is a kind of water on the fire that was burning, and it's unknown whether it is enough water to put the fire out. I kind of doubt it, but it certainly
Yeah,
is a major dousing.
it is.
And
It is. I
and
think the most
how
significant dowsing we've seen in our lifetimes, wouldn't you say?
absolutely, hands down, no way around it. And continuing to move forward. And when Charles and I were speaking, he sort of saying this is probably an event in a series of events
Uh
over
huh.
the generation, and this is part of a larger happening that
Yeah.
I'm sure we could connect to. If you want to look at it from a cosmic scale, it feels like there is a kind of turning, and this is just a major moment in that, if a quickening to be sure.
Right.
But when you were
Right.
speaking, I wanted to ask you about this idea of choice,
Hmm.
because I'm kind of hearing you dance between the idea that we have it and we don't have it, or the ways in which it's conscious and unconscious. And then it just comes down for me, I think about the soul's journey and what we're really here for. And perhaps it's just experience, but I know in my heart there's a level of choice and decisions
Hmm.
because we're navigating something, even though it's a shadow of probably what we think it is.
Hmm.
We don't need to understand it. We never will. That's
Hmm.
not the point. But we are here to make choices, I feel. And there's these doorways that open on infinite levels, from doing the dishes to the big things we have to choose.
Hmm.
Um, what comes up for you when I use the word choice and the individual?
Hmm. Well, the choice for me. Well, I don't want to get into the definitional, into a definition wrestling arena about what choice really is at
It's a
some
deep
deep
one. Yeah.
ontological level. But I think I can speak to that in this sense, that maybe by asking this question, if we suppose, and this might go into a little bit of philosophy, I think it's one of my comfort zones. You don't mind me staying a bit in my comfort zone?
Yeah, as an analogy, when we go on hikes or walks, we say there's hikes, there's wanders, there's saunters, there's meanders, and I make differences between the two. And this doesn't need to be a hike. This can be a wander. So feel
I would.
free to
So
let it
I
go.
there's this word coddywampling, which is a
Perfect.
so I'll coddywobble
Yeah,
through this.
let it go where it wants to go. It's okay.
I think for me that that when I ask the question, where does choice come from, and it's choice of this world, it leads me to different places than it would if I was stuck in the discursive space of inquiry about what choice really is and the presuppositions that choice is transcendent or preternatural or immaterial. Um, Again, I'm straddling the lines between a very um, a very familiar flight into language, into consciousness that is uh, that is familiar to my brothers and sisters in New Age traditions and stuff like that. Uh, I don't want to disparage those traditions, but I don't quite agree with some of their
Well,
offerings.
let's push back. I think that's a healthy thing to do. Because
Yeah,
I'm very much in
yeah,
those worlds, and we need criticism. We need
of
to
course,
sharpen the blade.
of
Yeah.
course. And on the other hand, I don't want to retreat into a biodeterminism. Like I've said earlier, the idea that the world is um, that if that I can singularly predict where an atom would be in some point in the future, because the world is made up of universal laws, deterministic processes. You know, that rules out any prospect of choice being real. I think
Depressing. Yeah.
it's very depressing. I don't want to live in that kind of universe. Um, and yet, I think something else. Like when I asked the question, does choice just pop up? You know, without being part of the world. I mean, when we say choice, what do we really mean? Can I make a choice to fly, for instance, to sprout wings and fly? Um, can you, if you're walking down a hallway, make a choice to suddenly be in a train or at a train station? Um, Somehow, choice is already boundaried by materiality. Um,
Yes.
and so this brings me to another consideration. Um, so there's two schools of thought for conversational purposes: free will versus um, determinism. Ironically, for me, are the same idea. Now, how is that possible? Determinism says matter or the material world is dead. It's mute. It's just it's just things bumping into things in some Newtonian way. There's nothing else to them, you know. I can control, predict things based on my how I bring things together. Who's that guy, that father of psychology, the father of behaviorism? Is it John Watson? Oh, James Watson. I forget his name. Who basically said, "Give me 20 children, and I will tell you exactly in a couple of years how they will turn out." So that behavior, which is a deeply American ideology at that time, and I think still lingering today. Um, um, so that's determinism. It treats matter as nonsensical, as dead. Free will, on the other hand, resists that. It says, nope. There's choice, there's uh, there's consciousness and all of that, but it does that in relation, still with the same idea that matter is dead. It's a retreat. It's an escape from the material realm um, that is supposedly deterministic. It doesn't do anything to that notion of deterministic material worlds. It just says we're going to be here. We're going to situate ourselves here in this linguistic space, in this consciousness space, and nothing else matters. Basically, it's about choice. So they make the same gesture of putting matter at a distance. What if matter is not to be uh, incarcerated that way? What if we release matter from its incarceration? What if matter is already part of consciousness? What if matter is hyphenated, if you will?
Mm.
Matter, material, discursive. Or what if, like a mentor of mine, Karen Barad, would say, what if matter is not actually matter, it is mattering? So that to name it is to violate some aspect of it. You know, in that world, I can see choice as the movement of things, um, and not just movement of things in a way that is closed. Determinism is a system of closure, and not movement in a way that is final or contained, but always retaining a spark of creativity that allows something new to burst forth. This is the idea, I think, of Foucault, French philosopher, of Derrida and Deleuze and all these guys, that the world cannot be contained, and that maybe we should see choice. I'm paraphrasing them radically. Maybe we should see choice as not just what Bayo can do, not what decisions, it's not just what Bayo can think or make in himself as an individual, but maybe the idea that I'm an individual is already a bias of perception. It's a habitual mode of seeing that blinds me to my connections with ancestry, to the ways that I repeat the things that plants tell me to do at molecular levels. Maybe I'm doing the bidding of microbial worlds in my gut. You know, maybe I'm
A both and, it seems. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm following the imperatives of apples without even knowing, but telling myself I'm making rational decisions. Let me tell you this, brother, and I cite this all the time in a beautiful book called Epistemic Situationism. There's this story. It's not a story. It's a report about experiments done by psychologists that demonstrate that there are situational things around us, that actually shape the kinds of decisions we make unknown to us. And we might think of them as trivial. For instance, if I asked you, what does it make or what does it take to become a good judge or a justice, in the court of law? You would
Mm.
cite things, personal characteristics like integrity, compassion, and stuff. But what they found is that the hardness of furniture, and I'm hitting my table right now, the hardness of furniture has untoward effects on how judges make decisions. That they found that judges were more lenient when the furniture around them was soft and cushiony, and
Yeah.
they were much more judgmental, much harsher sentences when the table was harder. It's crazy, but
Well, this is a Malcolm Gladwellian. I'm sure he took that and made it more of a pop culture thing. But the
uh-huh.
idea that you think you're making certain decisions when a
Right,
lot of it is quite predictable based on all sorts of external circumstances and psychology
right.
and
Well,
we know this, and it's in some ways troubling. But I, like you say, it
uh-huh.
is a both end. You write that like our lives are symphonies beyond orchestration, and I'm sort of like, well, who's the conductor? Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, but
I
I
don't
know,
know.
I know. Part of it is it's like it is not a conductor. The conductor is all that is in a sense, and that is the mattering. It is,
Yes.
it's the music. The
Yeah.
conductor is the music, is the harmony, and it's like wow. Now your brain starts to melt, and it's like well, that's the point. It's like,
The
it's
harmony or the cacophony, because I'm really drawn to cacophony, and, and the loss of harmony, like a
all sound.
murmuration.
Yeah,
All sound, yes, all
yeah.
sound, all noise.
Mm-hmm.
In a murmuration of starlings, who's the conductor? It's just it's a network of happenings. It's a network of molecular shifts, and again, by molecular, I don't mean to invoke a Cartesian cartography here. I mean to suggest that um, at some at some not even at some quantum level, even at classical levels of huge and visible things, the world is indescribable. Things are indescribable, and some neo-materialist um, philosophies are and projects are drawing upon this well of wisdom, insight, that to speak about the world is to disturb something, that there are some agential cost that happens when you attempt to describe the world. Yeah.
And yet, I feel we're here to describe the world, and I feel it's best done through metaphor, like through art, through things, through poetry. It's through things that speak through a broadness that can never be pinned down. Uh,
Yes. Can I say
I
something to that quickly?
I would
Um,
love that. Yeah.
sure, because this is very firing and inviting for me. Good. It feels for me that is what makes art art. It's a risky venture into the indeterminate wilds. If
Mm.
it were just a description of things as they are, then it wouldn't be worth the paper it's on or the guitar that it's sung from. It feels that art and creativity and choices are always unprecedented in a sense that
Mm.
that it's a community affair. As some things happen, some things gel in ways that are unexpected and surprising, a politics of surprise, if you will, and something comes together, and that coming together is risky. It's risky. It means you've gone through dragons, you've gone through minefields, but something comes together, and that's what makes it beautiful.
The gain of it seems to be twofold. One, in the expression of it. When
Uh-huh.
I express any form of creativity, I feel alive. Like I literally
Mm.
feel like something is coming through me that is supposed to, and without it, there is less point to me being here. But the other point of it is in the creation it makes. Should it make a lasting creation, it's a reflection of some kind that seems to be
Mm.
useful to others to see the same sort of otherness, to see the reflection of our beingness in it. And because we can never, I often use the metaphor of of octaves, because I'm a musician, and I look at this piano here, and it only has 88 keys, but I know that sound goes infinitely in the other directions.
Mm.
And sort of like that's the boundary condition I have to work with. And our consciousness, I feel, is the same way. It's the operating system we've found ourselves in that I'm going to trust meant to be in. This is what we're in. But there's a reason why I have these boundaries. And we tend to speak beyond the boundaries through art, through creativity, as a way of creating solace for this quandary we find ourselves in, of us looking at each other and just, I sense deep down, we're just sort of saying, there's a sense of peace, of here we are, be here now, and there's a sense of what are we doing here? How did we get here? What do we do? There's this yearning. In some ways, the yearning to get back to God is the yearning of like, what is doing anyway? Why do I always have to feel like, what is doing? What am I supposed to do? And then there's an end, and there's this existential crisis of like, what do I do in that time? And so amongst all that, that's why I think about choice a lot, and it's on my mind, and that's why I like music, because it's sort of dancing around these edges. I've mentioned this phrase many times. I had a guest, Eric Davis, who described the mystery as having no edge, and I love that because it's another way of saying, I mean, maybe you find a challenge as a writer and an author and a speaker in that words are even more direct. Like you're painting with dots in a way, as opposed to music that is more abstract. And it's more of a challenge. As you said, that the violence, in a sense, of the words.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what you're speaking to, I think.
I mean, well, there's a lot there that I definitely...
that was my cattywomp, lock a dog, whatever you called it. That was
cattywomple.
Yeah. Sometimes it gets away with me.
No, it's beautiful, brother. I heard you. And this is not to say again, because I heard this as well, and maybe just for sake of emphasis, it's not to say that definitions aren't possible. The world materializes based on definitions. We need definitions to thrive. We need definitions to be human, but definitions are always cuts in a fabric, in an unresolved fabric of becoming that always rules something out in ruling something in. That is why something is always at stake when we rule this way or that, when we measure something into being and measure something out of being. I mean, mathematicians appreciate the fact that there are infinities, not just one infinity, but there are multiple infinities, right? Or at least two infinities. When you speak about numbers, you can have an infinity of numbers themselves in logical progression, or you can have an infinity of odd numbers, an infinity of even numbers. They understand, though, that we can't work with infinities. So they cross out infinities. The place where infinities meet is where we work. Is where we create economy or politics. This is reading math into our daily lives. So art is definitional. Politics is definitional. Even psyche is definitional. The challenge is always to ask ourselves, and I think this is the beauty of art, is art recognizes the instability of every kind of definition. And that's what a trickster does, is right. This definition is inherently unstable rather. It's not fixed in time. And I can do it this way. I can build a house with stones, or I can build a house with rice. Who says I can't build a house with rice? There's some instability in the world that allows art to become, that allows music to thrive. If music were just a representation of some unearthly universal song, then there won't be much room for failure. And failure is what makes us human. Failure is what makes everything beautiful.
Yes. It's what that gives us the gift of learning, I suppose. The
Yes,
friction to be what we are.
Yes.
Maybe the old, I want to honor your time, so I'm going to move things towards a sort of conclusion of sorts. But I was looking at your emergence network, right? And this, I assume, existed before COVID. And
Yes.
what's interesting about it is I love this idea of post activism, which in
Yes.
itself is a kind of poetry. But it must have real meaning for you because it's a reaction against another form of activism that maybe is more linear. And what
Hmm.
does it mean? What does that mean to you? And especially, what does it mean to you now? Like, what does it mean in an age being asking us to pause? Where does activism fit in to a world that's on fire?
Hmm. Beautiful. Um, I I think I came up with the term post-activism, not, and I think it's an unfortunate um, arrangement of words because most people hear it and think I'm thinking of some kind of different, more sacred, more spiritual activism that is a progressive superior of contemporary activism. I don't mean that at all. I don't even mean to think of activism as if it's a homogeneous monolithic enterprise. Post activism, however, borrows from the notion of the post human or the post humanist um, ways of seeing. That is, by post humanist, I mean the rejection of the thesis that humans are central to change, that humans are the drivers of the world's becoming. I mean to suggest, and this is deeply indigenous um, when it comes to my own um, traditions, that we are the universe is under no obligation to explain things to us,
Mm.
to define things for us, to help us see clearly, or to appeal to our senses of righteousness and wokeness. It's under it, and that's why I resist ideas of calling nature a thing, as if nature is coherent and neat outside our windows. The garden outside our windows, or the wilds beyond that. Um, so the post-humanist is this rejection of that thesis. It's at least putting aside of the idea that humans are central to the workings of the universe. But it's also an invitation to see that we will often, in the at the in the very effort to change our circumstances, because we are not the sole instigators of our behaviors. We don't even know what ourselves are. I mean, we can be on I think it's a movie that I watched where a sports team crash landed in this icy, wintry space place, and they started to eat each other. And I think it's a read
Alive.
through.
Yes, that
It's
was a
is
book.
that the name of
I
the
read that
movie?
book. Yeah, Alive.
Thank you for
Yeah.
reminding me. I'm gonna go watch it
Mm-hmm.
again.
True
Um,
story.
True story, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's shocking because we might say, "Nah, I'm not going to do that." But we don't know. We couldn't possibly tell because under those circumstances tend to reign supreme, and we might never know where we might go. And which is the reason why I like what Charles says, that even the monster that I identify outside might be me in a different situation. Um,
Right. With
uh,
enough of pressure,
of
we've seen
pressure,
that in
yeah.
psychology that you make the same choices typically.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
typically, yeah, not absolutely, but typically. Um, so the post activism comes from this recognition that in the very effort to change our circumstances, with fine rhetoric, great intentions, we will often repeat it. It's what I call the politics of escape. And I wrote about this in a piece that I wrote about Batman, and especially the Nolan treatment, the Nolan-esque treatment of the Dark Knight in the final installment of that trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, where the very effort to escape jail or that pit, if you've watched the movie, reinforced the power of that pit. Um, that in our bid to escape, we make our incarceration more prominent, stronger, more powerful. And not just that, uh, the idea that we act unilaterally has been or is always over time being defeated. I'm, as a citizen of the global South, the unfortunate recipient of Western benevolence, is what I like to call it. People come into our communities and say, "Hey, you guys need laptops, okay? We want to train every child," or you need to recycle your trash, okay? Recycle your trash. The unexpected or the unanticipated consequences of this is what surprises us, that we never knew this could happen. I'm sorry, we never knew by bringing laptops into your community, we're actually um, making more porous the threads of communality that binds you together. We never knew by introducing the Bible to you, we're cutting off your links with your ancestors and with nature. We never knew all of this. Um, so post activism is, and I hesitate to name what it is because there's something fugitive about it. But for this podcast, for this conversation, I would say post activism is the gift of meeting ourselves for the first time. It's 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 literally touching the materiality of responsibility or the ways we respond to things. It is, and that can only happen when things penetrate the familiar, when the strange sprouts. And then we are afforded a post activist moment. It's always a moment, it's not a skill. We're afforded a moment to notice ourselves, to ask new kinds of questions, and to follow where that might lead. Um, for instance, we're asking questions about climate justice on the Emergence in the Emergence Network. We're saying, what if justice gets in the way of transformation? What if our notions of arrival are already the system, you know, entrenching itself for all perpetuity? So yeah, post activism is not a new way of doing activism. It's not a trendier, more spiritual resource. It is a shocking coming to terms with the contours of our own bodies or our own skins. It is a constellation of capacities that we might nurture in order to compost ourselves and assume a different kind of shape. There's no resolution, there's no solutionism here. There's no, this is how the world ought to be. There's no manifesto. It's not about manifestos. It's not about predicting the next. It's more about entering a modest, humble space that recognizes that we are in a web of life that exceeds us, that exceeds our own imaginations, and that maybe there is some gift or power in sitting still, which is the reason why I say the times are urgent, let us slow down.
Yes, the times are, and we find ourselves in a kind of post activism by the occurrence happening right
Yeah.
now. And to end this, what would you say is being asked of us? I mean, we've spoken about this a little bit, but just to kind of bring that invitation in again, because naturally there is a friction for people to think. It's very hard to bring pause when they feel so much needs to be done
Mm,
and they feel ineffectual as an individual anyway,
mm,
whether it's the climate or, I mean, gosh, pick your crisis.
mm,
And they don't want to feel there's their own spiritual bypass
mm-hmm.
of inaction. But man, when you say it though, I feel it in my bones. And everyone wants to do the right thing, or a lot of people do. They
Yeah.
want to feel like, well, I don't
Yeah.
want to be wrong. And
Mm.
so in this
And
moment, what is the invitation that we're being asked to embody? In addition, I hear pause. But in that pause, are we meant to listen for an action, or is it to just say it's a kind of trust in an action that is a larger occurrence? That maybe there's a momentum to it that is factors in our choice and this larger entropy that we're part of, whether we like it or not.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What if I told you, um, and not with the kind of confidence that presumes that what I'm saying is absolutely the case, but what if I told you that maybe the invitation is still being made, that even the world itself is still trying to figure out what this is, so that there isn't a some kind of already predetermined, pre-relational invitation out there that we're supposed to standardize or approximate or look like or resemble in some kind of way. That is an ethical arrangement that has led to the kind of identitarian, uh, you know, righteousness where everyone wants to be right, and I think there's something beautiful about that, but it kind of assumes or anticipates a world that is beyond ours, that we are just meant to copy. The ethics comes from that, is imposed on our material realm, and then we copy that. I don't think I see that way. I think I see the world in very emergent, open-ended ways. I think the invitation is still being drafted. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
I think as embodied beings, as multi-dimensional beings, we are, or becomings, multi-dimensional becomings, we're constantly pressured to shapeshift. And we do it all the time. Modernity doesn't know how to notice it. We're never the same in a stable, long-lasting, absolute, final, integritous way. Um, but we're constantly shapeshifting. Maybe, and this is a maybe, and I love the maybe. I stress the maybe because I don't want to um, present or contribute to a notion that this is exactly how it ought to be. And I know many people might speak from that kind of place, and I want to see what that does. But what I feel invited to share is there's a playful open-endedness to what's happening, that doesn't resolve itself into some kind of postmodern anything can happen or anything is possible, or everything is allowed. It's more like a different configuration of limitations, and different instigations are now alive, and we can respond to that, especially when we want to meet or or do something with our desire for wiser economies, wiser politics, or more beautiful world. What do we do with these desires? Um, if we recognize that the kinds of systems we've perpetuated are part of the problem, and that sometimes we have, even in our grandest, most sincere efforts to do something about our world, to do good things about our world, we end up, because we're part, I mean, action or agency is never unilinear, it's always communal. So when I put out an action, like a Chinese whispering scheme, the game we used to play when we were small, it never arrives the same way at the end of the chain. And I cannot do anything about that. Um, what if the invitation now is to sit with that trouble, to quote Donna Haraway? What if there are ways, rites of passage, rituals with which we can meet each other and stay with these shadows that are now showing up? What if this time is, like I call it, an insurgency of the invisible? Like things that we have pushed to our blind spots unknowingly, inadvertently, you know, are now coming to the field of vision and now saying, look, I'm right over here. What do you do with me? That's the crisis here. Not that things are stopping, but like you said, like we started out, the pause is the crisis, not the stop. The pause is the crisis. Let me just end this way. That I wrote in a letter today, for some of the communication that we're sending out for our Wilds Beyond Climate Justice Summit of the Emergence Network, which is happening shortly, May 31st. Um, and I told the story of Brazil, which is in a lot of trouble right now, like many other nations in the world. But it's like many people are getting infected there, and I have lots of brothers and sisters and family there. So if you're listening to this, bless you, and I hope you're protected. Um, that in Brazil in 2016, they were going to host the Olympics, and right from 2011, they started to prepare for it. They started to renovate Rio de Janeiro, and renovate other cities in Brazil. It came with a lot of displacement, a lot of excavation and stuff. One tractor one day in Brazil uncovered an archaeological site, a place of bones and memories. It happened to be the largest slave port in the history of the transatlantic slave trade, where approximately 900,000 or hundreds of thousands of people were buried. It's either they died and they were just stuffed over there because they didn't have proper burial grounds, or the people who were not actually sold, who stayed at the port and died there due to some illness they took on across the Atlantic. They died there and they came with their charms and amulets and trinkets and prayers, beads, and stuff like that. They found all of that in that place in 2011. They just uncovered this place. It's called Cais do Valongo, or the Valongo Wharf. This uncovering is apocalyptic. Um, and it's the literal definition, the etymological root of apocalypse, and uncovering and opening of things. I feel that this time is uncovering bones. And we can choose, like you say, brother, I'm going to use the word choice. We can choose to cover those things again. We can choose to just put a concrete layer over it and get back to business as usual. Or we can choose to sit with those bones, to do the hard task of meeting beings that we don't know how to meet. And maybe there, in those openings, we might shapeshift. And I feel that's the call of the trickster. An invitation that, again, is still being written.
The Roadrunner and the Coyote. Well, we'll continue the dance. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. And I deeply appreciate the conversation and getting a chance to look you in the virtual eye. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yes, I'm sure. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you so much, Bayo, for giving us your time. Man, I enjoyed that conversation so much. I really, really hope you can come back. Please do. Just a little sneak preview for you podcast audience members out there here in the community. I played around with this conversation and tried sampling it for a new record I'm working on. And I did put it to music, and I really like it, and I shared it with Bayo, and he likes it. So, God willing, it will be on my next record, and I think you're going to like it a lot. Stuff from this conversation put to music that's just like, so perfect and so amazingly fitting for what's going on now. That wasn't even happening when we talked, but it's like even more, it's incredible. The guy's a soothsayer. This music you're hearing in the background is called You're a Guru. It's the Slow Meadow rework from the Ram Dass Reworks album. That's on all streaming platforms and also eastforest.org. It's an amazing record of other people's reworks of songs from the Ram Dass record. So thanks for giving the podcast a review. You can do that right now if you haven't already. Thanks for sharing it. You guys keep walking your walk. I'll see you next week. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.
I felt I was the captain of my ship. Now, he's the captain of my ship. I surrender. I turn to him, and he decides. And God decides. He has his Leela. your game. And I'm part of that dance. You're a girl.